What's up everyone? So Canada's Wonderland is known for having a pretty good collection of roller coasters, but also they have one of the best collection of flat rides out there. They have tons of great ones and quite a few that are very unique and very rare to find at other parks. So overall today I want to talk about some of these more rare and unique rides and talk about exactly what makes them so cool. So with that said, let's of course get right into checking out all these awesome rides. So to kick off the video, let's of course talk about Sledgehammer. Sledgehammer here, just looking at it, you can tell that this is a crazy ride. It of course originally opened in 2003 and is made by Huss. Pretty much how this ride works is you get seated in one of these 6 claws. Then when the ride starts, of course, each of the claws spin around. Then the center part of the ride spins. And then the crazy part is, of course, this ride can lift you up and down really fast and overall offers some great airtime. And this ride, of course, was also a first of its kind and an only of its kind. So really, this is probably one of the most unique rides at the park, which is crazy. Now, even with how cool this ride is, one downside to it is just how much mechanical errors it faces. Of course, on a typical day, this ride will often shut down just due to it having some sort of issue that they have to fix. But still, it's such a great one and probably one of the most unique experiences you'll ever get on a flat ride. So overall, if this ride is open when you go, it's definitely one that you should go on because you're never going to get another experience like this. And moving on, let's talk about Tundra Twister. Which Tundra Twister here is another first of its kind ride that of course opened a couple of years ago in 2023. And this ride here is very interesting. It's pretty much a pendulum ride, but unlike the typical ones, which of course sit in a circle, this one instead has 2 arms that stick out from the ride and are able to freely spin around, which overall offers a much more unique experience compared to those rides. Now, one thing about this ride that I hear people complain about often is, even with just how big and impressive this is, it's not too forceful of a ride. Of course, it moves around at a fairly slow pace. It doesn't really spin you upside down too much, and it doesn't offer too many forces. But overall, the motion of this ride is still very fun, and of course offers some pretty good views of the park and the surrounding areas. And of course, this ride here is made by Mondial and is an avalanche model. And honestly, it's just such a unique ride to look at, and overall, this ride does go pretty high, so it is pretty fun to get some of those good views. And overall, I do not believe that they have built any other rides like this in the world, so it's another one that you're not going to get another experience like this at all. So it's definitely one that if it's open, you should definitely try out. And carrying on, let's talk about Wild Nightmares. This ride is pretty much like a zero gravity around a model, except there's a few main differences. Of course, one big thing you'll notice is this is a lot bigger. Instead of it being a smaller circle that's all connected, this one instead it's a much bigger one and has individual cages, which each one sits 4 different riders. And of course, when this ride gets going, just like the other models, you get pressed up against the wall and then it lifts up. But one really cool thing about this is instead of it maxing out at around a 45-50 degree angle, this one instead goes completely vertical at a 90-degree angle. So overall, you're just looking directly down at some spots on this, which is really crazy to think about. And of course, like with other models, this one there isn't really much of anything holding you in. It doesn't have any seatbelt or restraints or anything. You're just locked in a cage. So overall, this one, it's just so crazy that, yeah, you go vertical and then there's really nothing holding you in. And this ride here is definitely another very unique one. Of course, originally there was only about 24 built, and currently operating, there's only about 10 or so left in the world. And of course, for this ride is a Huss UFO model, and overall, this ride is definitely the final boss of these rides which you stand up on. So honestly, it's another one that if this is open, it's definitely one that you should try out. So overall, definitely a very unique ride. And carrying on to the next ride here, let's of course talk about Skyhawk. Skyhawk here is a very cool one and definitely a very unique experience. Of course, on this, it lifts you up a tower, which you spin around. And when the ride gets going, of course, you can control the wings on this. So, of course, you can do some cool flips and other stuff. And overall, I love the rides like this, where pretty much you control part of the ride. So this, you can either just have a relaxing experience or try and get as many flips in as possible. And overall, definitely a really awesome ride. I love just how you can get some really good views on this. And overall, it's a bit more of a unique one. There's only 5 of these currently in the world, I believe. So overall, an awesome one, and another one that, yeah, you should definitely check this out if it's open, because this one is just such a strange experience. And next up here, I want to talk about Lumberjack, which the ride model itself isn't really that much of a unique one, but the overall look of this is very unique. Of course, this ride is just a kamikaze type ride where, of course, you sit in these seats with your legs hanging down, and then, of course, you just spin around and you get to go upside down. And overall, it's a very common ride that you can find at many other amusement parks, but the really cool thing about the model here at Canada's Wonderland is just the way they themed this, because overall, it looks incredible. Overall, for this one here, they themed each of the arms on this ride to these massive sledgehammers, which looks cool. Of course, the arm is just the big wooden half, and then, of course, where you sit is the sledgehammer part, and overall, the theming movement on this looks very cool and definitely makes this the most unique version of this ride out there, I'd say. So overall for this one, if you have been on these kamikaze type rides before, you're not really getting too much of a unique experience, but just to have this ride in the park and to look at it, it's a very cool one. Alright, and carrying on, there's one more ride I want to talk about here. This one is, of course, Soaring Timbers. Which Soaring Timbers here is a strange one. Of course, the arm for this ride is sort of on an angle, and when you get on this, you get seated on one of the two sides of this. Then when the ride gets going, of course, that one big arm swings around, and then, of course, the chairs on this are able to flip around, and, of course, the arm they're connected to can also spin. So overall, tons of crazy motion going on this. You never really know where exactly you're going to go next. So overall, definitely a very unique experience on this ride. Of course, I couldn't find too much information about this ride model. I, of course, know that it is made by Mondial and it is an Inferno ride, but I couldn't really figure out anything else about how many of these are currently in operation. I believe that there isn't too much in operation, so it's another one that's a fairly unique ride, but overall, this one looks crazy, definitely a unique experience, and one that I would definitely recommend getting on if you have the chance. And overall, with all said, everyone, that of course is it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoy. Of course, those rides aren't all the flat rides they have. Those are just the most unique ones at the park. Of course, they have a ton of other ones, which are all really awesome, and yeah, they have such a good roller coaster lineup, and it's crazy just how good their flat ride lineup is too at this park. But anyways, with that said, that of course is it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoy. If you did, please make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below if you've ever been on any of these rides and if you like them. Anyways, I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.